I stood there on my back porch, mud stinking up the air, listening to the deafening roar of those industrial pumps as every last drop of water got sucked out of my lake, my so-called problem pond, while my neighbors actually clapped like they were at the end of a movie. Right there on the shore, high heels sunk into the soft earth, was Sarah Mitchell, the proud queen of Willowbrook, grinning like she'd just saved the world. You ever see somebody so satisfied with themselves, you just want to ask what kind of movie they think they're in? That was Sarah beaming, convinced she'd just protected the community. If only she'd realized all she'd really done was rip out the one thing keeping her own house from turning into a swimming pool the next time the sky opened up. She thought she was clever with her homemade emergency certificate and her posse of loyal neighbors, but I had something she didn't: every drainage plan, every pipe schematic for this entire subdivision tucked away in my basement file cabinet. All it would take was a couple of valves, 2 outlets, and one good downpour for karma to make its grand entrance. My name's David Parker. I'm 38, and I've lived at the end of Willowbrook Drive for almost a decade, working city planning by day, minding my business by night. Most folks think of me as the quiet type, maybe a little odd who bought this house just for the little lake out back. That pond was my sanctuary, somewhere to watch ducks glide along the water and let the day's stress fade out. Sarah, though, she's 34 and rules the HOA like it's her birthright. She inherited the biggest house in Willowbrook, then spent 3 years turning the Homeowners Association into her own personal fiefdom, hiding her hunger for control behind the phrase protecting property values. But really, she just liked having everyone dance to her tune. 6 weeks before that mess with the pumps, Sarah got her hands on an anonymous complaint about bad smells coming from my place. Didn't take me long to figure out she'd written it herself using a fake email to lay the groundwork for the attack. The joke: my pond was cleaner than half the pools in Willowbrook thanks to the little filtration system and years of work building a balanced ecosystem. But that complaint was all Sarah needed: a ticket to flex her power, and maybe to get back at me for questioning the 12 grand she'd spent on fancy street lamps nobody wanted. The first shot fired was a hand-delivered HOA violation notice, all puffed up with legal language about community water management and potential environmental hazards. I about laughed myself sick. She was trying to regulate a natural spring that'd been here since before the first house went up. Now, I could have just let it go, but I'm stubborn. I fired back with a 20-page engineering report, photos, drainage calculations, environmental impact statements, you name it, proving the lake was helping the neighborhood, not hurting it. County regs even protected it. But Sarah, she wasn't about to let facts get in the way. She called an emergency HOA meeting telling everyone I was a stubborn risk to their safety. And then came the fines, $500 a week, courtesy of her made-up emergency powers arriving in the mail, looking just official enough to scare folks. I called her up and she hit me with, "Mr. Parker, your cooperation would be appreciated, but it's not required." Then hung up. Classy. She cranked things up to psychological warfare, spreading rumors that my pond was breeding mosquitoes. Never mind the fact that I'd stocked it with fish and frogs that eat them. She even convinced a handful of neighbors to sign a petition backing her up with glossy flyers full of made-up stats about waterborne diseases. Most ridiculous of all, she hired an environmental consultant who was actually her cousin's boyfriend with a fake business card. His report was just doctored photos and nonsense about algae blooms. I tracked down his credentials: fake degree, fake business. The guy probably couldn't identify a puddle if he tripped in one. 3 weeks in, she invited a news crew to an HOA meeting, painted me as the villain in front of a crowd who barely understood what they were voting on. She stood there in her suit voice, trembling with righteous anger, running a PowerPoint, comparing my dangerous water retention facility to stock photos of natural disasters. The whole thing was a circus, and when she demanded I submit to professional remediation or face immediate legal action, I could feel the room turning against me. Then came the final straw. Sarah showed up at 6 in the morning with a work crew, police on standby, and a megaphone. She had forged documents, claimed she had emergency authority, and just like that, the pumps were running. I tried to explain to the cops that she was trespassing and the documents were fake, but they weren't interested in neighborhood drama, told me to take it up with the courts. That day, I watched 15 years of work get turned into a muddy pit, my ducks wandering around confused. 3 died before I could rescue the rest. Sarah stood at the edge for the news cameras, soaking up the glory, saying, "Sometimes leadership means making tough calls." Yeah, right. That night, while Sarah celebrated, I was at my dining table spreading out the Willowbrook drainage plans, the ones I'd drawn up myself 12 years ago as the county's lead hydraulic engineer. See, Willowbrook's built on old wetlands, and without my lake, the drainage system had nowhere to let off pressure when storms hit. Sarah had just unplugged the only thing keeping her own house and her loyal supporters' homes from getting soaked the next time it rained. And I still had the master keys to every access point in the neighborhood, a little oversight when I'd changed jobs. Early the next morning, there was a knock at my door. It was Mark, Sarah's husband, a soft-spoken accountant I'd barely talked to before clutching a manila folder. "I need to talk about what my wife did," he said, sounding like he hadn't slept in weeks. Over coffee, he told me everything he'd been documenting Sarah's HOA violations for months, prepping for a divorce, collecting proof she'd embezzled over 87 grand from the HOA, and how every violation was just a personal vendetta or money grab. The consultant was her cousin's boyfriend, and all the fines, all the scare tactics, it was about power and cash. Armed with the evidence and my knowledge of the drainage system, I came up with the perfect lesson. When the next big storm rolled in, I'd make a few temporary adjustments, redirect some drains, close a couple of valves, just enough to send the water where it needed to go. The neutral houses would stay dry. Sarah and her closest allies. Well, they'd learned just how important my lake had been. 3 days later, with the rain pouring down, I moved through the neighborhood under cover of night, making precise tweaks. By morning, Sarah's front yard was a lake of its own water, creeping up her driveway, garden gnomes nearly underwater. Her buddies faced the same soggy fate, while the rest of Willowbrook stayed bone dry. Sarah lost it, calling city emergency services, demanding to know why her house flooded and her neighbors didn't. Engineers checked the system. Everything looked like normal maintenance. She screamed sabotage, but there was nothing to prove it. 3 days later, she called another emergency meeting, TV crew in tow, accusing me of weather manipulation, showing drone shots of flooded lawns. She demanded I be thrown out of the HOA. That's when I stood up, briefcase in hand, and introduced myself, not just as the quiet neighbor, but as the engineer who'd designed their entire drainage system with licenses and awards to prove it. I spread out the blueprints and explained in plain English exactly how my lake had kept everyone safe. And then I dropped Mark's folder, passing out copies of bank statements, emails, proof of embezzlement, and a cherry-on-top video of Sarah's crew dumping concrete in the drains. The room erupted, neighbors demanding refunds, shouting about fake violations, calling for her arrest. Even Mrs. Chen, fined for planting the wrong flowers, got a few words in. The vote was quick. Sarah out as president. The evidence sent to the cops, and a community suddenly united. She lost her house, her husband, her money, and whatever respect she had left. The HOA ditched half the dumb rules she'd written, set up transparent budgeting, and my lake, rebuilt by the neighborhood, was renamed Parker Commons, a place for everyone to gather with new ducks, courtesy of Mrs. Chen. Mark stayed, became a friend, and together we made sure no one person would ever run roughshod over Willowbrook again. Now, when I sit by the lake watching kids play and the sun go down, I think about how bullies only win when everyone else stays silent. Turns out sometimes the quiet guy at the end of the street is exactly the wrong person to push around. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about standing up, knowing your stuff, and waiting for the perfect moment to let the truth flood in. So tell me, was I right or did I go too far? I'd love to hear where you stand on community justice and how you'd handle a power-hungry HOA president. Drop your thoughts below, because trust me, this isn't just my story. It could happen anywhere.